I love that commercial because there is all kinds of craziness that happens in the world. And I love the fact that the Marines are saying, that's where the crazy's happening, that's where we're going. And I'll tell you what, I think that's the attitude the church needs to have. When there are sounds of chaos and there are things that are just being destroyed everywhere around us, I think the church should be the ones to say, man, I'm running to the battle. I think that's who we need to be as a church. In the Old Testament, there's a story of a young man who did just that. His name was David, and we're going to learn about him this morning. And so if you have a Bible, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one in the chairs in front of you. It's page 203. You can find it on your phone or tablet pretty easily. If you have your own Bible, 1 Samuel's toward the beginning of the Bible, after the book of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then 1 Samuel 17. To understand what's going on in this passage, the nation of Israel and the nation of the Philistines, they're in battle. And they have come together and they've got their battle lines drawn. And there's something unique that's kind of happening. The champion of the Philistines, he's a guy named Goliath. And the dude is large. And he's 9 feet tall. And he's tough. He's not a minute bull, skinny rail of a guy. He is a thick guy who's really strong. He's the champion of the Philistines. And every day he comes out to the battle lines and says, hey, who's willing to take me on? Which you send one of your champions, I'll fight him. If I win, you all become our slaves. If you win, we'll become your slaves. And every day Goliath goes out there and does that. And David, this young shepherd boy, probably a teenager, he says, what's going on? Why isn't anyone going to fight this guy? And in 1 Samuel 17:48, a lot of stuff happens, but in verse 48, here's what happens with David. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. I love that. David ran quickly to the battle line. He didn't just go, all right, well, I guess I got to do this. He ran to the challenge. And I look at that, and I think so many times we shrink from the giants that are in our lives. We're afraid to confront a family member about the choices that they're making. We let fear of losing our job keep us from telling our boss no when he wants us to cross an ethical line. Our financial situation seems too big to handle. And so we just keep putting it off. What is it about David that caused him to run to the battle? Tell you what, he may have been a teenager, but he had learned a lot of important lessons in his short life. And what we're going to find is this. If you're going to overcome the giants in your life, first of all, you have to ignore the detractors. You have to ignore the detractors. 1 Samuel 17, verse 28, David had showed up at the battle. He brought food for his brothers. He starts looking around saying, okay, what's going on here? As he's doing that, in verse 28, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep of the desert? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now, what have I done? Said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the men answered him as before. David came to bring his brothers food. I mean, that's what his dad sent him to do. And when he's getting there, he's asking questions, saying, who is this guy? Why is he challenging? And David's oldest brother looks at him and just gets mad at this younger brother. Those with siblings, you can understand. And David's brother is embarrassed because of the questions that David's asking. David's asking, why isn't someone taking this guy on? Why isn't someone standing up for God in this situation? And David's brother is one of them that has not been doing that. I think he's embarrassed and he wants to stop David. And David's reaction is, he just ignores him. He said, that's my brother. I'm just going to ignore him. I'm going to keep asking questions. I'm going to figure out what's going on here. You know, whenever you attempt something new, there are going to be people who will try to sabotage it. Some of the people are well-meaning, and they don't want you to get hurt or they don't want you to fail. But I'll tell you what, if you never risk something, you can never succeed. Henry Ford failed in 5 businesses before he succeeded with the Ford Motor Company. Some people are well-meaning, they don't want you to get hurt or fail, so they're going to try and drag you down to keep you from going forward. Some people don't want you to succeed because if you do, it makes them feel like they're less. If you go out and do something great, they're like, well, I could have done that, but I had a doctor's appointment. But you see it all the time. When you see someone get better and better and better, people most of the time aren't congratulating them and encouraging them, saying, hey, you go. Most of the time people are like, yeah, they could do that, but, and you make up excuses and they try and pull that person back down instead of cheering on their success. I don't know if you've known, but this is a presidential election year. And politicians are doing this on a pretty regular basis. Some people don't want you to try something new. They don't want you to succeed. Sometimes it's voices from your past telling you that you can't do it. You know, every time you think of doing something positive, all you hear inside is how there's no way that you can. Sometimes that's parents, things that they said when you were growing up. Sometimes it's other people in your life. Just those voices in your head sometimes keep you from trying something new. But our Heavenly Father does not want us to shrink back. He does not want us to be afraid. He wants us to go forward, and he wants us to go forward with boldness. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul wrote to this young preacher, Timothy, and he said this. He said, God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. God didn't give us a spirit of timidity where we just have to constantly go through life just afraid of everything. God instead gave us a spirit of love, of self-discipline, and of power. All kinds of people could say, that can't be done. But with God behind you, how in the world can you fail? Amen. David experienced that when he saw Goliath. The detractors said, he is so big, there is no way that you can win. And David said, he is so big, I can't miss. To overcome the giants in your life, first of all, you have to ignore the detractors. And second of all, you have to remember God's help. You have to remember God's help, what he's done for you in the past. As David was going through and saying, okay, I'm going to fight this guy, King Saul heard about it. And he called David in and said, hey, who are you? What's going on? And David said, hey, here's who I am. Here's what's happening. Verse 34, David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. David said, I was a shepherd. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. That's stinking cool. When one of these animals, when this lion or this bear took a sheep, David again, what did he do? He ran toward the battle. You know, he's responsible for these sheep. He says, I'm going to take care of this. And so a lion and a bear, David killed. And what did he say? The Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion. The Lord delivered me from the paw of the bear. God has kept me safe this far. In the middle of these challenges, in the middle of these overwhelming things, as a teenage boy, David was able to say, God delivered me in these situations. I think David had to be thinking at some point, God's keeping me alive for something. If he's got me through those things, there's something more he wants me to do. You know, I think most of us would agree that God has worked in our lives a lot of times. The problem is we tend to forget those times. If we would take the time to remember what he has done in our past, it would give us courage to trust him in our future. That's exactly what Moses told the Israelites. As Moses was kind of giving his farewell speech to the nation of Israel, he was going to go die, and they were going to go into the promised land. The promised land looked tough. There were a lot of established nations there. And they were strong, and they were in fortified cities, and it was going to be very easy for the Israelites to be scared of them. But in Deuteronomy 7:18, Moses talked to the Israelites, and he said this, "But do not be afraid of them. Remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt." Moses says, do you remember Egypt, the superpower, the biggest, baddest nation in the earth at the time? You remember how God took care of them? I think he can deal with these obstacles as well. God is going to take care of you in this situation. You need to think through what God has done. You need to think through what God has done in your life in the past. I was in a small group a few weeks ago, and people started talking about how they started giving to the church. And they said how scary it was. But about 3 or 4 or 5 different households were saying, we started giving financially. And when we did, this weird stuff started happening. I got a check in the mail for it was exactly covering a bill that came up. And I'm just sitting there listening to it because it wasn't prompted by me. Okay? Contrary to popular opinion, I talk about things other than money. All right? But just to hear these people spontaneously telling these stories, it's like, man, we need to video this or put it down or something, because we're going to forget that. Because when it happens the first time, we're like, yeah, me and you, God, we're together. Thank you. And then a month later, another bill comes due, and we're like, well, I can't give to the church this week because this bill's there. And that's what we do, because we've forgotten what God has done in the past. You know, it's hard at times to make decisions. It's hard to go forward. It's hard to overtake the giants when we think we're doing it on our own. That's why I tell you on a regular basis, write down the stuff that God has done in your life. Write down the answers to prayers. Because as you do that, when you come against new giants and new obstacles, you'll have the faith to know God has taken care of me in the past. He's got this too. And as you face new and bigger giants, you're going to have the confidence to know that he's with you. David was able to take on Goliath because he had fought a bear and a lion before. David remembered how God helped him in the past, and it gave him courage to take on the next challenge. If you're going to overcome the giants in your life, you have to ignore the detractors, you have to remember God's help, and then you have to be yourself. You have to be yourself. King Saul says, all right, David, you need to go and take on Goliath. That's great. But what I need you to do, man, I can't send you out there against that monster dressed like you are. You need to put on my armor, okay? You need to start wearing my weapons and armor. And in verse 38, Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. He took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. I can just imagine Saul, if you don't know all the story, Saul was a tall guy, okay? And so he was a big guy. The Bible says he was head and shoulders above everyone else. So he was a tall guy. So he had his armor, okay? Just this armor around him, and it was his size for him. And David is this small shepherd boy, and I could just imagine putting Saul's armor on David, and it just kind of dragging the floor, and putting the helmet on his head, and kind of shaking his head, and it's just kind of flipping everywhere, and probably pulling out the sword and going, ugh. Okay, this one's a little bit big. And David says, I can't do this. I'm not you, Saul. I can't fight like you do. David instead goes out and gets his sling and 5 stones from the brook. He says, these are the things that I use. These are the things I'm good at. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to fight this giant the way God has designed me and not the way God has designed Saul. There was nothing wrong with Saul's armor and his weapons. Nothing wrong at all. It was just different. It wasn't David. And you have to face the giants in your life in a way that makes sense to you. Oscar Wilde said, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Be yourself. But I'll tell you what, all the time, so many times in our life, I think people, we come to situations and we're trying to face this, and people, sometimes well-meaning people are saying, well, this is what you need to do. This is the way you need to deal with this situation. And I'll tell you what, I don't give tons of advice, but one big parenting advice that we give is, you need to do what's right for you and your family. Because everyone else out there is telling you all the stuff you should do. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot easier to run someone else's life than it is to run your own. And that's why you get some of the advice that you do. People telling you this is the right way to do it, it's the only way to do it, and if you do anything else other than this, you're wrong. Well, you know what? How is your life going? That's what you need to ask him. And the big thing is you do what's right for you and your family. Because that's the way that God has made you. You need to act according to the way that God has made you. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but how many times do we get overwhelmed with advice from family or friends or coworkers or whoever that says, this is the way that you should do it. Not only is it the way, it's the right way. But God has made us different. And we take on challenges in different ways. And 1 Corinthians 12:12 says this, the body is a unit, though it's made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body, so it is with Christ. The body, the church, is made up of many parts. And I'm so grateful that there are so many parts. I was glad for the diversity. I mean, if you can imagine everyone in this church being Tom Malone, what a disaster that would be. I mean, we'd have all these short people walking around, with gray hair, and we don't want that. God has made us as individuals with our own gifts and abilities, and you need to stop trying to do things the way other people do them. I was just at a church conference this last weekend, and it's easy for me to get sucked into that. You hear these preachers get up and say, well, here's what we did at our church, and it was the best thing in the entire world, and 7,000 people came to Jesus in 12 seconds. And you just leave there going, dude, I suck. I'm awful. And I've been to enough conferences to know the reality of the situation. I know that whenever a guy gets up to present something at a seminar or conference, he's telling you the best of his ministry. And he's telling you a lot of times one event that happened. And whenever you compare yourself to the best of what they've got with the worst of what you know of your situation, you always come out on the short side of things. I think that's why it's important that we follow God, that we seek after him, we seek his wisdom, we seek to do things in the way that he has made us. And what worked over there or over there or over there may not work for me. And so when we are dealing with our giants, we need to be ourselves. David didn't try and fight Goliath in the way that Saul did, because he's a different person, he had different strengths, and we need to do the same thing. To overcome the giants in our life, you have to be yourself. And the last thing is this: to overcome the giants in your life, you need to promote God's glory. You need to promote God's glory. In verse 45, these two combatants get out there, the Philistine Goliath on one side and David on the other. And David says this: you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Man, I love David. I just love his boldness. He's like, man, you're coming at me with all this big stuff. I'll tell you what, I got much bigger weapons. I got God on my side. And you've been out here mocking God. Tell you what, that's going to stop now. I'm cutting your head off here in a couple minutes. So get ready for that. It's part of the story we don't tell the kids next door. All right? But David's confronting the battle. He says, he's confronting the giant. He says, the battle is the Lord's. You know, David is all about giving God the glory. David's not saying, hey, I'm the best fighter in the nation of Israel, because honestly, he wasn't the best fighter in the nation of Israel. I mean, Saul could have whooped him. But David says, I'm going out here because you've been mocking God, and I'm not going to stand for it anymore. God could use any one of these soldiers, but I'm willing to step up here, and I'm willing to make this happen. I love David's attitude. And I love how it's so different from our society today. You know, everyone in our society is trying to make a name for themselves instead of making a name for God. Our society is obsessed with self. I was talking about this with someone just a week or so ago. You know, professional athletes, here's what they say about professional athletes. When they're talking about them, they talk about them promoting their brand. And you know what their brand is of a professional athlete? It's not the team that they play for. It's not even the league they play for. It's their name. Their name is their brand, and they're trying to promote their brand. What they're saying is they're trying to promote themselves. And they're trying to see how much money they can make doing that. And we look at those evil, rich athletes and think, how could they? And then you go on Facebook, and you look at all the selfies. You look at all the people taking all these pictures of themselves in all these different situations, and they're putting it on Facebook so that everyone can see them. And I'll tell you what, at least the athletes are making millions of dollars to promote themselves. Facebook people are just promoting themselves. You know, the Apostle Paul warned us in the last days, people would be lovers of themselves. Now, may have always been lovers of ourselves, but now we can show it. And God says we're not supposed to be obsessed with ourselves. God says that we need to be obsessed with giving him glory. In 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink at whatever restaurant you're taking pictures of food with. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of you. Man, I've got a messed up translation. Hold on. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do it all for the glory of God. Whatever it is that you're doing. When you're going and you're serving someone, you see someone in need and you go and you help them out, you're not doing that so they can say, hey, look at you, you're such a kind person. You say, you know what? I may be kind now, but if you knew me a couple years ago, you would say that is not a kind person. But you look at what God has done in me, and I'm able to be kind now because of what God's done in me. Whatever you do it for the glory of God. Integrity in the workplace. Oh my gosh. In the workplace, there are so many times that you can be tempted to just fudge a little bit about this or just be dishonest about that. I was in a situation very recently where that that opportunity was there. And some people were saying some things. I said, well, okay, if you're willing to put that on paper that you're going to be responsible for the outcome of that, then absolutely, let's do it. And boy, did they backpedal. They just started saying, what we meant to say is, what if we do this instead? And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a good idea to me. Give God the credit for the stuff he's done in your life. Not just you and him, but when other people acknowledge you. When people go and compliment you and stuff like that, that is not wrong to say, you know what, thanks, I appreciate that. Thank you, I do. But there are times when you have the chance to give a conversation. It's not just kind of a passing thing, and you get in the conversation and say, yeah, it's not what I used to do, but God's really been working in my life. And I want to give him the credit for what he's done. David didn't want to win the battle so that people would start saying, oh, David, you are so great. I mean, just listen to his words. He was angry at this giant who was disrespecting God and said, the battle's not mine, the battle is the Lord's. I don't know what giants you're dealing with in your life, but if you're going to overcome those giants, you're going to have to, first of all, ignore the detractors, the people who say it can't be done. Second of all, you have to remember God's help. Remember what God has done in your past to know that he's also going to help you in the future. Number 3, you have to be yourself. Stop trying to be everyone else in these situations. Work in the way that God has made you. And fourth, promote God's glory. Stop trying to promote yourself. God will take care of that in the right time, in the right way. On September 11th, with the World Trade Center buildings collapsing, thousands of people fled the scenes. But there were hundreds who ran to the buildings to rescue the people. Some like this police officer, Christopher Amoroso. He ran back to the buildings to help save people. And he ended up losing his life as one of those buildings collapsed. When we run toward the sounds of chaos, we're putting ourselves in a position to say, I want to help. And sometimes when that happens, we get hurt. Some people lose their lives. But I'll tell you what, God needs people on this earth who are willing to run towards the sounds of chaos. In Scottsdale, Arizona, God needs people who are willing to run toward the sounds of chaos and say, I'm going to make a difference in this community. And I think if you're a follower of Jesus Christ already, and you spend a lot of time just sitting in the chair, you've been going to this church for a while, but you've never said, I'm willing to take on some of those giants. I'm willing to get out of my chair and do something. If you haven't done that, and today's the day to make that decision, make that choice. I'm going to pick a giant in my life. I'm going to stop talking about it. I'm going to stop whining and griping and complaining about it. I'm going to say, God, David did those things. I want to do the same. God, work with me. Work in me. If you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, probably the first giant you need to tackle is to give up your life and say, I want to be a follower of Jesus. And that's a huge giant, but it's one that you don't have to deal with on your own. There's a church family here who wants to support you and encourage you and say, you know what, I've taken that step. Let me help you do the same. We have people that will talk with you and share with you from the Bible how you can begin that relationship with him. So if everyone would stand up where you are, if you need to talk with someone about your walk with Christ, if you need to talk with someone about the giants in your life, why don't you come meet me up front as we sing this song.